All right, well, I think I will get it rolling, and then we can just watch the participants and make sure, but I think we want to make sure that we have enough time for our program today. So well, I guess it's good morning. It is only 11:30. I'm Deb Kohler. I work with Accessible Services here at the IDS Center in Towers of West End, and I am your current chair of the Board of Directors. As you may have read on the note that was sent out on Friday, October 7th, the board approved the selection of Sarah Anderson as our new president and CEO. And I'm pleased today that we have Sarah joining us, even though her official start date isn't until Monday. Sarah comes to us with 25 years of experience working with both member organizations and managing government relations. Her most recent work involved serving as the executive director for the Minnesota Turkey Growers Association, excuse me. Just prior to that position, she was the executive director for a nonprofit dedicated to helping children learn to read in underserved communities, and she spent time in the Minneapolis and St. Paul public schools striving to close the achievement gap. Before entering associated management, Sarah spent 12 years as a state representative in the Minnesota House of Representatives. During most of her tenure, she served on the Ways and Means, Tax, and Commerce committees. She also served on the Rules, Environment, Finance, and Government Operations committees. She was recognized nationally by 3 different organizations for her ability to work across the aisle and find bipartisan solutions. So welcome, Sarah, and we want to give you an opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you, Deb. And members, I'm just really excited to be joining you officially on Monday. I'm glad I had the opportunity to join you today and listen in on this very exciting group of panelists that you have today. I think everybody is on pins and needles waiting to see what Election Day will bring and what that means for the industry overall. So looking forward to learning from each and every one of you and the questions that you asked today. And hope that I'll put in the chat box my email address. I just got my BOMA email address, which I'm really excited for, along with my cell phone. And I just want you to know I'm here. Any questions or concerns that you have, feel free to reach out to me, and looking forward to helping the industry.
Well, thank you, Sarah. We're excited for you to join our organization. Sarah, as I indicated, Sarah's first day in the association office will be on Monday, October 25th. With that, I want to take a minute, although not in script, Christine, to thank Kevin Lewis for the first time for his hard work and dedication to our organization. And I know that the transition over the next several weeks will be a successful one, and more to come on a celebration of Kevin and his dedication to our organization over the last 10 years. So Kevin, I'm going to hand it over to you to get the session started.
Thanks a lot, Deb. And a celebration. I'm not dead yet, but I mean,
not your life. Not your life, your career.
My career. Thank you. No, thanks a lot, Deb. That was very nice of you. And I want to add my welcome to Sarah as well. She and I had a chance to meet over the years over at the Capitol, led by Doug Carnival and so on. And we're going to have a very, very smooth transition. So this organization will not skip a beat in everything that we need to accomplish. And I'd like to add my thanks to the executive committee, those involved in the hiring process, because there was a lot of work involved, a lot of interviewing, and we had some terrific people raise their hand and were interested in the position, and we couldn't be more delighted to have Sarah joining us. So let's get on to a little housekeeping items here. February is just around the corner, well, not quite, but a little bit around the corner. And, you know, we've got our gala, and it's going to be back in person, everybody. And it's going to be on Thursday, February 17th. I brought it up before, but I hope all of you that are on the call will certainly add it to your calendar, we're looking to return to the Depot Minneapolis Renaissance, where we've been in the past. The sponsorship has been really tremendous given everything that's been going on the last year and a half. So we're delighted for those of you on this call that have made an investment to offer their sponsorship for the gala. For this year's Toby competition, by the way, we have 10 buildings entered in 6 categories. So congrats to all of you that'll be competing here locally and then regionally and then nationally. And then the nominations for the Best of BOMA, those are the individual awards, will open on November 9th. So start thinking about those individuals, whether they're property managers, engineers, service providers, et cetera, those that you feel are very deserving of individual awards. And if somebody was nominated last year and perhaps they didn't win, let's get them back in the queue again. So we look forward to having all of you submit those individuals that deserve recognition. And the events committee is busy planning our annual holiday party, which will take place on December 9th. Now, we didn't have one last year, so this one will be December 9th. They're still looking at some possible venues in that regard, but more details will be coming out to that. So again, if you could scribble that on your calendar or enter it on your calendar, I should say. As always, all of these events are publicized and registration information and so on our Connect-Ed e-newsletter that comes out on a routine basis. So that's really it for any housekeeping items. And now let's really get to today's presentation. As you know, it'll be recorded and shared via our website. And we really want to encourage and invite you to utilize the chat feature throughout this session to present the questions to the panelists, and make sure that you include everyone and not just the panelists on the chat feature, because then that will, I think, inspire other questions to come up. And then the panelists will take the questions and answer those as soon as they can. The election coming up, we're really at a crossroads, and that's maybe an overused phrase, but I think for the elections coming up the first week in November for the city of Minneapolis, we are at a crossroads for mayor, city council, and some very important proposed charter amendments that we'll get into on this call. And I know that many of you are interested, maybe understand it, maybe not understand it as much, but we're here to answer some of those questions. Today's session objective is to provide you, our BOMA members, with detailed and factual information on the elections and the possible impact. Our panelists will share their knowledge and expertise to engage and help educate all of you, our members, on the slate of candidates and potential outcomes. Our moderator is our good friend, Doug Carnival, principal with the McGranchi, Carnival, Strawn, and Lamb, who've represented us for years and years. So with that, I'll turn it over to our moderator, Mr. Doug Carnival. Doug?
Thank you very much, Kevin. Can everyone hear me? Just want to make sure. Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yep.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, Doug. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, I'd like to welcome our panelists to this very important discussion. As you know, this is a critical election and it's going on right now. And I just want to remind everybody that we'll do this again in 2 years, because the city council elections will only be for terms of 2 years, and each gentleman can explain why if it's necessary. But it's a critical election, and we have 3 very distinguished panelists to join us today. First is, of course, Steve Kramer, the president and CEO of the Minnesota Downtown Council and the Downtown Improvement District, and a past member of the Minneapolis City Council, where I might add was one of the best I've ever worked with over the years. We miss him on the council, trust me. He's also worked for a nonprofit organization, Project for Pride in Living, and the Minneapolis Community Development Agency over his career. Steve serves on several boards in the Minneapolis area and is the co-chair of both the Hennepin County Workforce Leadership Council and the Heading Home Hennepin Executive Committee. He's a bachelor's of science degree in urban planning from the University of Tulsa, where Drew Pearson went, I should add, and a Master's of Art in Public Affairs from the Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs at the U of M. Our next panelist is Jonathan Weinhagen, who is the president and CEO of the Minnesota Regional Chamber of Commerce, whose goal is to help the business community thrive by building strong communities and partnerships. They play many roles, including being a policy advocate that supports the business community while providing high-quality networking and leadership training. Prior to joining the Regional Chamber, Jonathan was vice president of the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce. He has been on several boards and is a member of the Family Housing Fund and the Mounds View Board of Education. Some of his honors include being named to the Twin Cities Business Magazine's 100 People to Know and the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal's 40 Under 40. Jonathan received his undergraduate and master's degrees from Bethel University and later attended the University of Minnesota Humphrey School of Public Affairs for its Policy Fellow program. And our third panelist is Hamline University Professor of Political Science, David Schultz, who teaches across a wide range of American politics classes, including public policy administration, campaigns and elections, and government ethics. David is also a professor at the Hamline Law School and the University of Minnesota Law School, where he teaches election law. A 3-time Fulbright Scholarship winner, David is the author of numerous books and articles on various aspects of politics and election law, and is regularly interviewed and quoted in the local, national, and international media on these subjects. Professor Schultz has a PhD in political science and a JD from the University of Minnesota, as well as an LLM from the University of London. He also has an MA in political science and philosophy from Rutgers University and State University of New York at Binghamton, respectively, as well as a BA in political science and philosophy from Binghamton as well. And as I did some background research on David Schultz, I looked on the internet and found 2 interesting facts about him. First, he has a master's in astronomy, of all things, from James Cook University in Australia to add to his philosophy degree. But as I looked forward under Dave Schultz, I found that he may have had another career that we were unaware of, performing in the wrestling world as Dr. D. So here's what Dave Schultz looks like as Dr. D. And he may want to comment on this during his comments, but these jokes usually go over better in person, by the way. So without further ado, let me invite our panelists to start by discussing the race for mayor and some of the key city council races. Let's start with Steve.
Great, thank you, Doug, and glad to be with you all. I'm sitting in a conference room in Hilton, Tampa, so I'll try to keep my phone as steady as possible unless my arm goes numb, so you don't get disoriented. But Doug, I would start by saying, and I've said this before, in my 42 years now being involved in politics or civic affairs in Minneapolis, there's not been as consequential an election as this one because of all of the races, the mayor, the 13 council members, and then unusually so, the 3 charter questions. I think what we can say from the polling that we've done, and Jonathan can elaborate on what we mean by we, is that all of these races are going to be razor thin close. It's a very divided city right now. Unfortunately so in my book, and almost no matter what the results are, one of our key challenges will be to try to unite and kind of move forward together as best we can. But I do hope for an outcome that will reelect our current mayor, replace several of the incumbents who have been difficult, I think, for our business community and others to work with, and which will pass question number 1, which would reform governance of our city, make it more of a strong mayor system, defeat question number 2, which would replace the police department with an ill-defined Department of Public Safety, and defeat question 3, which would open the door to rent control. I'm sure we'll get into more of the specific races as we go along, but from my perspective, that's kind of an overview.
Jonathan, how about you?
Thanks, Doug, and good to be on with everyone. And I think Steve captured kind of the baseline premise of where we're at with regards to the election. He and I have been in the trenches on this for the last 9 to 12 months on a daily basis. But to remind folks that for us as a business community, this effort really started in advance of the 2017 election, when we had some real concerns about the direction of the council and the direction of the city from a governance standpoint was headed. I would argue, and I think Steve would agree, kind of our worst case scenario has been what we've lived the last couple of years. The chaos on the third floor, a series of different policy decisions that have been really counterproductive over the course of the last several years. So we see a real opportunity in this election, to Steve's point, potentially one of the most consequential elections in our city's history, to swing that pendulum back, to reset the stage, and to think about what that future looks like. To that end, we are actively engaged in an independent expenditure effort called All of Minneapolis, which is making expenditures across, primarily two of the ballot issues, questions number 1 and 2, as well as supporting the reelection of Mayor Jacob Fry. And we can walk through some of those ward by ward council races that are potential pickups and opportunities to moderate the council and create something that is more workable as we head into the future. So I'm excited to dig into some of the data ward by ward, happy to share some of the insights that we've gleaned even in recent weeks from a data standpoint. But I won't stand in front of the good professor any longer, because I'm sure he's going to impart all of the wisdom on us today.
Professor, it's all yours.
Okay, great. First off, that's not me as the wrestler, by the way. I thought actually what you were going to hold up. There also used to be for those of you who are hockey fans, used to be back in the 1970s, the Philadelphia Flyers had a quite good hockey team. And there was a David Schultz there who's like in the record books for the most penalty minutes for any given season. So I have two competitors, either that wrestler who I think killed somebody. I think he was involved in a murder or something like that. Okay, so I'm not either of them. Okay. So let me tell you a couple of things I think to think about for this race. I mean, no matter how we cut it in some ways, what this race is really coming down to is really all about what? Referendum number 2, ballot initiative number 2. And what I mean by that, that's the one about the funding for police, is that I think that drives the entire election. And what I don't know yet, and I think kind of hinted at it here, is that in terms of what's going to happen in this election, I think we've got a coalition of people very firmly supporting wanting to reform the police. And we can talk more about this in a few minutes, or what we mean by reform the police, what that ballot proposition is. And the question is, are those activists going to come out, and in what percentage? At the same time, how I look at it, for those of you who might remember a long time ago, in 1968, when Richard Nixon was running for president, he talked about the silent majority out there. And what I wonder is, how large is a silent majority out there in Minneapolis that's looking at the unfortunate statistics on homicide rates going up, crime going up, et cetera, et cetera. And are they going to come out? And so to me, I think ballot proposition or initiative number 2 really is everything. That's going to drive the election in terms of who shows up to vote, how they show up to vote. Additionally, my second point I want to make is the fact that this is not just a race that affects Minneapolis. I mean, when all is said and done, it has implications statewide, because what happens in Minneapolis drives the state of Minnesota. But 3, I suspect we're looking at incredible amounts of money that are eventually going to be disclosed coming in from across the country, because Minneapolis has become sort of the test case on a lot of different things. And so that, I think, is going to affect the race. And then the final thing I want to remind everybody of, don't forget, it's not with the ballot propositions, but with the elected offices, ranked choice voting is there. And I think ranked choice voting is going to be very, very critical in this election. If you saw the Star Tribune, I think it was yesterday or the day before, the progressives of the Democratic Party in Minneapolis are encouraging their supporters, don't rank Jacob Fry whatsoever. So this becomes, the ranked choice voting, a complication in terms of figuring out what's going to happen. So think about that there. It's all about number 2. 2, it's the national implications and how it's going to affect it in terms of money coming in. And 3, ranked choice voting, I think, are going to be the 3 variables.
That's terrific, gentlemen. I appreciate that. Speaking of ranked choice voting, perhaps, Jonathan, you could tell us a little bit about how it works and what the state of affairs is and how long it's going to take to get a result.
So you're asking me to break out the Windex, Mr. Carnival, and look into my crystal ball. So ranked choice voting has been active in the city of Minneapolis for the last several election cycles. It gives voters the opportunity to do just that, to rank a series of candidates. So you don't have to just pick one candidate, pick a number of candidates, and then there's a roll up. So if a candidate doesn't receive 50% plus one vote on the first ballot, you start to see those second choice ranked votes calculated and tabulated until one of the candidates emerges with a majority of the votes, a 50% majority of those votes. What I can tell you is in the last cycle, we saw ranked choice voting play a really prominent role in the election outcomes, particularly with the incumbent field where there were two candidates running to that incumbent's left. So a sitting candidate that might have been perceived as being a little bit more moderate had two challengers to the left. And that spelled a recipe for Barb Johnson to be unseated, for Councilmember Blanc-Yang to be unseated. And then you saw some of those head-to-head competitions, somebody like Lisa Goodman against Yana Philstrand, emerge in a very traditional format. So we certainly think ranked choice voting is going to play a really prominent role in a number of the council cases where there are several candidates. And then probably most importantly with the mayor's race. We're watching that and tracking that in the data. What I can tell you is to date, nobody has broken that 50% threshold. What you saw yesterday, in addition to some of those state legislators and the progressive arm of the DFL coming out to say don't rank Fry, is the two leading challengers, Sheila Nazad and Kate Knuth, both coming out and saying that they were going to rank each other number two. So really setting up the stage to see if those two challengers could emerge, one of them with 50% or more of the vote and unseat the incumbent. So we're watching really closely. It's my hope that in 12 days and 8 hours with some change, when the polls close, not that anybody's counting, we'll have some pretty definitive results in some of these races. But we may see the mayor's race go into Wednesday or Thursday, which is what we saw in 2017 when we had a much larger mayoral field. I would argue 5 to 7 really viable candidates, and it was a roller coaster ride over the course of the 72 hours post-election.
Yeah, Jonathan, if I could just follow up something very quickly on you with the ranked choice voting. Keep a couple of other things in mind, and you probably have better statistics than I do. What I'm seeing at this point is the approval rating for Jacob Fry is in about the mid-30s. That's what we're sort of seeing in the polls here. When I've kind of looked at the numbers and played with them here, if Fry isn't in, let's say, the mid 40s after the first round, I think there's got to be a concern, because if he's in the, like say 44, 45, 46%, I think he's probably not in a bad position of getting over the 50% hump. But if he comes in, let's say in the upper 30s, all bets are off at that point.
I think that's right. And, we'll share with this group, we'd rather be us. And I think a lot of us in the business community are supporting the reelection of the mayor than the opposition. Our most recent data would suggest that after the roll up, he still has about a 20-point lead, still not quite to that 50%. And there are some undecideds out there. I think the other thing that we've seen, and, Professor, you've been looking at these numbers as well, 10% of the electorate in Minneapolis does still identify as Republican. And that's a group, when we talk about turnout, we know that the youth turnout is going to be a huge factor in both the charter questions, the council races, and the mayor. But also, the Republican vote. Are they going to show up in this off year election? We believe that while they view the mayor unfavorably, and with some pretty significant unfavorability, but likely he's the best option in the mix. So do they stay home, or do they come and provide a couple of percentage points in his column? Those are all the variables around turnout that are going to drive the outcomes of this election.
I think you're absolutely right. Go ahead. Please go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Professor. As you said, you both have said that the key thing about ranked choice voting is you not only evaluate the candidates, but you actually have to evaluate the composition of the field. And in this case, kind of the dividing line, as you suggest, Professor, is the public safety amendment. There are a number of candidates for question 2, others against question 2, including Mayor Fry, but the against group seems more organized, frankly. That part of the field, that part of the composition of the field is more organized in terms of how ranked choice voting might work. So I think we are on pins and needles as to how the mayor polls on that first ballot, because I think you're right about your sense of the math, and hopefully, he'll be in that mid 40s and can pull it out at the end. But again, it's going to be close. And we can apply that same logic to some of the council races as well, where the nature of the field may kind of suggest that one side of that for or against question 2 is going to prevail in those council races also.
Yeah. This is a comment for perhaps a different day, but I've increasingly come to think that we shouldn't have like mayor's races and stuff like this in and let's say in non-major election years. What I mean by that is, as we know, the turnout during congressional midterm elections, presidential, is much higher. The whole theory of putting council races in these kind of odd years is that people would focus more on it, on the local race as opposed to the other. But as you know, generally Minneapolis, elections, the turnout is not spectacular. So that, a candidate who could basically bring out, I don't know, a few hundred votes in a city council race, that puts that person over. And so so I guess I'm saying is here, longer term, I think we need to rethink about that as a structure. But this is going to be a race about what? All the races here, this is the logic of small numbers. And a whole bunch of races, a couple votes here, a couple hundred votes there in council races, that's going to decide everything.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Professor. Let me ask the other two panelists what they think about the prospects of changing the election date to a more regular format on either presidential or the off year in terms of every other election cycle. Is that going to take a charter change, and is there any appetite for that?
Well, I don't think it takes a charter change, Doug. I think the fact that we have another election in 2 years for city council is a reflection of state law change, which
Right.
This is where this would have to go. And while I think there's some great merit and wisdom in what Professor Schultz has to say, I don't particularly see an appetite for it at the moment in Minneapolis.
Jonathan, your thoughts?
I would agree with Steve, and I would add, I think we've talked a lot about turnout. A lot of the modeling that we've done to date would suggest potentially a 55% turnout, which is a little higher than we typically see in a traditional city council election. The other thing we haven't talked about yet is early voting that has played a really significant role in recent elections. So as much as election day is November 2nd, and that is what we are all charging towards, the polls have been open since September 17th. And votes have been cast. Now we aren't seeing, the level of intensity that I think some of us expected in early voting. I haven't looked in the last couple of days. Steve, I don't know if you've looked at where those numbers are, but early voting's been a little bit anemic as compared to recent years, which I think gives us an opportunity to do two things. One, to continue to educate the electorate, and maybe foreshadows that people haven't fully made up their mind and they're waiting to closer to the election day to make their ultimate decision. And we're seeing some of that undecidedness, narrow in these closing 10 days, but it's still there.
Yes. Yep. I agree with that.
Let's shift discussion a little bit to endorsements. We know in the olden days, the endorsement of the Star Tribune was important, and recently the Strib came out and gave its endorsement for the various candidates of the mayor's race and the city council races, and also the ballot questions. Of course, we've just seen Congresswoman Omar give her endorsement, and we've seen Senator Tina Smith provide her endorsement with respect to the police issue. Tell me what you think in today's environment, the endorsements of various organizations and individuals have on the election. Professor, why don't you start with that one?
Sure. Okay. So first, I think organizational endorsements matter most to the organizational members. I mean, nothing against you folks there, but probably what position that you would take isn't going to move a lot, maybe some other organizations out there. So one, I think it's an important signal that's there in terms of our own members. Second, I would say that generally the Star Tribune hasn't been driving, I think, in terms of too many voters, but I think in terms of like where they're going to vote, I think this election is going to be a little different because I do think there is a again, a group of people out there who are on the fence, who they've heard about these ballot propositions, they've heard about a variety of things, but they're not as well informed. Now, whether or not they're reading the Star Tribune, I don't know. Are they getting something through the social media? I don't know. But I think the Star Tribune, I will say, is going to move a few percent of the vote. I don't think it's going to move a lot, but it's going to move a few percent. In terms of Omar, somebody like Omar, the people who are going to vote for the ballot proposition, we're going to do it without Ilhan Omar. The Tina Smiths, the Amy Klobuchars, what is it? It's Governor Waltz, if I remember correctly, and Angie Craig have all come out against it. I'm not sure, same thing. I think the people who are going to support them are probably not going to support those ballot measures either. So I'm a little skeptical, but at the end of the day, I'm going to say we're looking at, if you're telling me 10% are undecided, I guess a few percent of those might be affected by those endorsements.
Jonathan, your thoughts on that?
I would just say a couple things. One, I think Professor's right in terms of the statewide and federal elected officials. Seems like they kind of fought each other to a draw, and I'm not sure that in the end that's going to make any difference. I think what the Star Tribune did, and I don't know I think the readership is really good, but how influential it is, I'm not sure. But what they have done is they've really drawn a through line for this election. I mean, there's a logic that connects all of their endorsements, and it goes right back to the point that Professor Schultz made that Jonathan and I totally agree with, I believe, based on what we've heard and what we've seen from our pollster. Either you have come to the conclusion that question 2 is the wrong thing for our city, not because we believe in the status quo, but because that won't deliver the change we need. And therefore, what candidates up and down the ballot you're going to vote for, or the reverse is also true. And so really, it's almost an all or nothing kind of election. One side or the other in terms of of question 2, and the candidates aligned with it one way or the other are going to win this thing. I don't think there's going to be a lot of mixing and matching, and the Star Tribune has drawn that through line on one side of that argument that we happen to agree with. But we'll see what the voters think.
Jonathan, any thoughts that you have?
No, I think that's right. I think Professor, you framed it well. Question 2 is the issue of the day. It's the issue of the election. To Steve's point, the Strib, I think, has done a good job. We have to remember that the Minneapolis electorate has historically been and is highly educated. I think the unique nuance, and Professor, you highlighted this, is people are still wrestling with where they stand on question 2. I would think there's uniformity, and I will speak for Steve and the business community. We all agree that we need reform. We all agree that we need a department that looks different than the department that we've experienced over the course of certainly the last several years. There's a group of us that believe that this isn't the right way from a public policy standpoint, or just generally of how to get there. But other folks are continuing to get educated on that issue and defining it. And the last thing, you're going to hear me say this throughout our time together, it's a turnout game. We've got 2 factions of our electorate that are going to drive this. We've got a 45-plus-year-old. Everybody identifies largely as being liberal or very liberal, and then you've got 30 and under, and those are 2 very disparate blocks of voter universe. And the block that shows up beyond what we typically see in an election is going to be the block that carries the day, which is why, as important as some of these endorsements historically have been and are, you continue to see a migration towards on the ground. The construct of all politics is local and retail. And it's why canvassing and phones and those grassroots efforts have been a critical part of campaigns on both sides of the ledger. It's why we've had a citywide canvass that has knocked 67 doors across the city over the course of 3 rounds, an additional 20,000+ doors knocked in North Minneapolis. Because as we look at that African-American electorate that doesn't support the charter amendment, so they want to defeat the amendment to the tune of 75%. If we can move that block of voters who historically haven't always voted in these off-year municipal elections, that's going to be the margin that carries these charter amendments in one direction or the other. And then to Steve's point, I think a lot of the candidates are going to follow.
Yeah, you make a really good point, because what people are forgetting about this election, I guess your data is showing us, the Star Tribune, CARE 11 poll showed it, et cetera, et cetera. Not only is it that sort of that fissure, like in terms of liberal versus very liberal voters, the racial divide in this is absolutely fascinating. Is that everybody's gut instinct would be to say that what? No, people of color support this, support to, whites oppose it. When in fact, you've got the reverse here. The people who are bearing the most costs, I'm going to be blunt here, bearing the most costs right now for the rising crime rate in Minneapolis are the ones who are saying, no, we want the police here. We need the police to look like something different, but we need the police here. And I think that's important. The other thing I want to mention here is that there's a framing issue on ballot proposition 2. Don't forget, what was it, like 8 or 8.5, or was it? I said 9 last week and someone corrected me, but whatever it was, 8 to 9 council members stood in a park 18 months ago and said, 9. They said defund the police department. Even though the ballot proposition itself, the charter amendment, just says they're giving council members discretion to do what they want on this. How this is being thought of is what? It's a defund. It's being framed as a defund issue. And even if it's about just saying council gets to make a decision, it's what? The next council. I think I think this is all about what? Trust. Do we trust a next council of which we have no idea what it looks like? What's it going to do when it comes to police reform? That's a huge leap of faith going on out there. And I think that's got to be one of the framing issues.
Yeah, David, I think that's absolutely right. The other thing that I would add, and just remind folks, because we've seen what I call a fascinating rendition of history emerge from those who are supporting this ballot measure. This was rooted and is rooted in the defund and abolition movement. The group and organization that went out and collected 22,000 signatures, 14,000 of them that were valid, to get this ballot measure on the ballot this fall, have been very clear on what their end goal is.
That's right.
Now, I remind folks that they're probably reading the same polling data that I am on the defund messaging and the abolition messaging. And interestingly, their narrative has shifted, their campaign effort has shifted over the course of the last several weeks. But I don't think we can ever forget, in addition to that future state of trusting a council that we don't know, we also know that the activists who have been pushing for this and will continue to push, right? A national movement, an experiment in the city of Minneapolis that is driving towards a very clear outcome. And that outcome is to defund the department.
Yeah, and I would add to that one other dimension here. If question 2 passes, hopefully it won't, but if it does, there are consequential decisions that have to be made very quickly by this lame duck city council. The city clerk has made it clear that they will have to appoint an interim public safety commissioner or director, and 2, the authorities of the chief of police will be transferred within 30 days from the chief of police to that interim appointed position. That's some serious stuff, ladies and gentlemen. And the other side, the Yes for Minneapolis side, simply doesn't give it enough gravity. That's serious stuff. And I'm concerned about kind of the immediate aftermath of question 2 if it passes, this council not being prepared to deal with it, in our community really further fracturing over this most important question.
I mean, Steve, that's a really important point. And the thing that I wonder about is what prevents the city council from establishing a public safety agency now that is also would work in tandem with the police to affect the goals of reform and better policing. Why is that a problem that cannot be right now?
Doug, in my opinion, somebody can argue this, but in my opinion, not a damn thing stands in the way. Yeah. Not a darn thing. Excuse my language. There I think 2 key deceits right now in the Yes for Minneapolis campaign. One of them is just this point that somehow we need to change the charter and incur all the liabilities that question 2 brings, kind of a new bureaucracy, putting the city council in charge, all the intangible effects of this passing, in order to create a more comprehensive, multifaceted safety system. Absolutely untrue. The other conceit is that somehow the staffing minimum in the charter is controlling resource allocation decisions. Also absolutely untrue. Our department is so far under the minimum required in the staffing formula in the charter, that it's a non-issue as a practical matter, and will be for several years. And so I think they're trying to lead us down the road to the kind of safety system that we all agree is necessary. Law enforcement plus multifaceted approaches only can happen if the charter is changed, and that just is not true.
You make a really good point here, because last Friday I gave a talk like Friday morning to I think it was like the Minneapolis Emerging Leaders Program. I'm forgetting what it's composed of kind of young professionals, and somebody asked me the question, and I said, does anything right now prevent the Minneapolis Police Department from hiring social workers? And I said, no. I said they could probably hire all the social workers they want, or think about it. The police department could coordinate with other city agencies if they had to bring them on. Would it be better if we had a few more social workers? It probably would. But I think that's a really important point here, because, and this woman asked me the question, in genuine kind of like, I don't know what's going on. And I think that's, again, she's that 10% that's out there we need to talk to yet. And so, yeah, I think that message has to come out that we can do under the current structure, hirings, reallocations, and coordination to bring in more, let's say, caseworkers, social workers, alternative people. We could even train police officers differently. I mean, all that's possible under the current language.
Yep.
Steve, I would just add really quickly, there's an additional deceit, and that is that often the Department of Public Safety at the state level is being pointed to in the response of the State Patrol during the unrest over the course of the last couple of years as this really effective model, and it has been. But don't forget that that department has a CEO, a strong executive in the governor of our state. So when you hold these two ballot measures, and going back to how interconnected these are, it could work. A Department of Public Safety could work, but probably not with this really unusual governmental structure that the city of Minneapolis has had that's created dysfunction that we've experienced.
Speaking of that, I just want to let's shift gears a little bit to the interrelationship between the strong mayor provision on the ballot and the public safety provision. It seems to me, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, the irony of that is if they both passed, we would have a situation where now the mayor is solely responsible for the police department. The city council is responsible for all the other agencies. If they both pass, those responsibilities would flip. The city council would be responsible for the police department, and the mayor would be responsible for all the other agencies. Kind of a nutty solution that I'm not sure anybody's thought through. Steve, you want to talk about that?
Well, I think people have been questioning that, Doug, and the best answer I've heard is it lands on the city attorney's desk initially to sort it out. And after that, it probably lands at the district court.
That's right.
Doug, I just can't believe that you would suggest that the city hasn't thought something through.
I'm going to jump in here, gentlemen,
recorded, remember?
we do have a question in the chat here from Alexander. We talked about many on this call are talking about supporting the mayor for re-election. If posed the question, shouldn't the current mayor be held accountable for the current state of the city? And so maybe Jonathan, if you want to start with that, and maybe it stems from who's running against the mayor.
Yes, I'm happy to take a first crack at this. Absolutely, the current mayor is accountable to many of the things that happened, particularly during the pandemic, where he had some unprecedented controls under emergency powers. And we can point back to this diffuse structure of governance that really does mean that he shares a lot of that power with the council, with the exception of the police department. So I think, in my opinion, has the mayor been perfect? Absolutely not. Has he acknowledged some of the missteps over the course of a really unprecedented 20 to 24 months? I believe he has. And I'd much rather see a leader who has led for 4 years, is ready to continue to lead, than hit the reset button. So that's one piece of the ledger. The other piece to me is when you look at the field, in particular, the two challengers in Sheila Nazad and in Kate Knuth, not the right direction for certainly for the business community. Sheila Nazad, I would argue, maybe one of the least qualified mayoral candidates we've seen, just based on background. Kate Knuth, a really brilliant policy mind, but as I combed through her positions, just concerns that she's not going to advance the interests of this regional economy into an economic recovery in the way that I'm seeing Mayor Fry do so as the sitting mayor in the middle of a heated election and positioning for the next 4 years.
I would just amplify that. I think, there are a couple aspects to this. One is who's going to be willing to listen to a variety of voices. My main frustration over the last 4 years with the city council has been their unwillingness or inability, the majority of them, not all, but the council majority, to really listen to a diverse set of voices, including the business community and others in the city that just don't agree with them, and hear that genuinely, try to discern the right path. Not that they have to sort of take our word for it or do everything that we want them to do, but listen and show some evidence of finding a reasonable, balanced way forward. Just hasn't happened. And my concern about Nazad and even Knuth is that they will continue to be captive of those really loud, strong, organized voices that have a hard ideological point of view, and they will not perform the way that the mayor has mostly performed, which is to try to listen to everyone. He's had a tough council to work with because of that confirmation bias that they operate under. With a different council, I think Jacob Fry can be an even better mayor, and that's why I'm supporting him.
So here's just a quick question for all of you. If the measure passes with respect to the police department, is Chief Rondo on his way out, or is he willing to stick around?
I don't know that any of us would purport to speak for the chief. What he has been public about with regards to the amendment is that he believes it would be wholly unbearable. So my prediction would be that if it passes, his days here are numbered, which would be a real shame because if you don't know Rondo, I would argue he's one of the most progressive transformation law enforcement leaders in the country. And he could be somewhere else right now if he wanted to. So that'd be a real loss for our city.
Yeah, you take a clue from it. Within the first 30 days, if it passes, the city council, lame duck council, has to appoint a interim boss of the chief and strip all the chief's duty and give it to that person. Take a wild guess as to what might happen.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing, is that he is between that and the fact that he would be a highly sought after police chief elsewhere in the country. My guess is 30, 60, 90 days. I'm not sure what it would be, but either he's booted or he basically says, I've had enough, and he moves on somewhere else.
I think his phone is already ringing.
I do too.
I'm sure of that. It'd be a shame to lose him, in my own opinion. So let's spend a few minutes talking about some of the key city council races that affect the business community, especially downtown, and some of the races that are not downtown but are going to have some impact on the balance of power at the city council. Steve, you want to start talking about that?
Well, I think the two council members that represent downtown are in the 7th Ward, Lisa Goodman, longtime incumbent seeking re-election, and Steve Fletcher in the 3rd Ward, completing his first term. And that was the ward that Jacob Fry represented prior to being elected mayor. I think our best guess is that Lisa Goodman is going to win re-election. Certainly there's some strong candidates opposing her, but she also has a very strong, well-organized campaign, and she's been working hard. So I think that's what's going to happen in 7. 3, I think, is one of those really close contests where it's possible for an incumbent to complete his term of service at the end of this year in favor of, most likely, Michael Rainville would be the candidate that would win. And that's going back to our ranked choice voting question. This might be one of those cases where the composition of the field is helpful to a challenger defeating an incumbent, because there's another candidate, Merv Moorhead, who is more aligned with Michael than he is with Councilmember Fletcher, who will probably attract some number of votes and certainly would aggregate up to Rainville if he's eliminated during the counting process. So, our polling suggests, and Jonathan, you might want to elaborate on this, that Rainville is very competitive in this race at this point.
Yeah,
Jonathan, thoughts?
Happy to. And as we think about the construct of the council and getting to something more sensible, the path is to get to a council majority of 7. that can work in that direction. Steve reminds people all the time, and I've now stolen this line. I think it's almost become my line with attribution, Steve, that the very first vote that this newly seated council will take is to elect a council president. And we've seen examples of really effective council presidents, of not so effective council presidents. And that's going to drive a lot of what we just talked about, that working relationship between the council and the mayor, regardless of governance structure, is really critical. And that has eroded over the course of the last 2 years. And I know, Steve and I, as leaders of the business community, and Kevin and others, have had a bit of a front row seat to that. So as we look at these council races race by race, it's really about where is there an opportunity either to fill a seat that's been vacated, and there were 2 with council members Cano and Bender not seeking re-election, and where are those opportunities to maybe, as Steve affectionately says, give an incumbent an opportunity to go try something else after the first of the year. I'll do a quick run through, and then maybe the professor has some thoughts. We're really looking at 6 wards that we believe have some mobility. Actually 7 wards that have some mobility opportunities, 6 of them that could be in that kind of more sensible direction. In the second ward, the incumbent Cam Gordon has a really strong challenger in Yusra Arab, endorsed by the Star Tribune. Initial data would suggest that she's performing well. She's doing some really good work. And that could be a potential pickup. Cam's a longtime council member with a lot of name recognition, which is a driver in these local races. But that's one we're watching closely. Steve talked about Ward 3 in downtown. As we head to North Minneapolis, Wards 4 and 5, Ward 4, Philippe Cunningham, the incumbent, has a tough road ahead of him. Very unpopular, a lot of emerging complaints about constituent services and responsiveness, coupled by being opposed by a very strong candidate, Latricia Vitale, an African-American woman, currently serves on the park board, running a really well organized campaign. And in North Minneapolis, this question 2 that we've been talking about driving the conversation is absolutely going to play out. In Ward 5, we haven't polled on that in a while, but Councilmember Ellison, we believe, is not in the position that he'd like to be as an incumbent headed into the election. And then we get to that Ward 10 open seat, 5 strong candidates. Well, 5 strong candidates. 3 of them I think are fairly aligned with the business community's interests. So I believe ranked choice voting is going to really be a factor there. That may be one that we wait until Wednesday or Thursday to get the results on. And Ward 11, Emily Koski is the challenger to incumbent Jerry Schrader, and is mounting a really impressive campaign. We believe she'd be a great council member. The last one is Ward 1, Northeast Minneapolis. That's Kevin Reich is the incumbent. He failed to achieve the DFL endorsement. He's got a really strong challenger. So that's one that we're concerned, could flip. He's doing a lot of the right things in the home stretch. So we see a path to that, 6-7 member sensible majority that would really be a game changer with regards to how we do our work. Again, we're not always going to agree with the council, but the opportunity to have a much more productive and collaborative working relationship moving forward.
Professor, any thoughts about the balance of power on the city council?
Yeah, a couple of observations. First, I'm going to come back and say I think the big bellwether is going to 2 things are going to be here. One is who fills Bender's seat. I mean, I think that's really important there in terms of where it goes. But I'm also going to say that who fills Ellison's seat is important. I think Ellison is really a bellwether in so many ways. That I'm going to say that he's been one of the biggest drivers of a lot of the defund police movement. To me, if he winds up losing, I'd almost go to the point of saying if he loses, number 2 is going down also too. That's the sense. But the other thing I want us to think about here, and I'd be curious for your thoughts here, is you're not going to get a first term, God, I hope not. You're not going to get a first term council member as president of city council. Who do you see out there emerging as a likely good president of city council? It's going to, I'm going to say it has to be a current incumbent that's going to be going into another term. So I'm just curious what you folks see.
I mean, I'm willing to say it publicly. I think conventional wisdom would suggest that Council Vice President Jenkins is really well positioned. In my opinion, almost regardless of the makeup of the council, she's built some really strong coalitions. She's proved to be somebody who can work across issues and across ideologies. So I think she is a front runner at this point, in my opinion. Steve, I don't know if yours would differ.
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily differ with that, Jonathan. Professor, I make it a practice. This is just an old tick from being on the council. I just don't talk about organizational decisions out loud, but I do think, depending on the outcome, Andrea could be sort of a compromise candidate. But if the kind of weight of majority is kind of one way or another, there could be a couple of other people kind of on both sides of this divide we've been talking about who would raise their hand and say, I'm the right one to lead this particular council. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that shakes out after we know who's going to be in office in January.
Let me just follow up on that. We haven't talked much about the strong mayor amendment on the ballot. Tell me what you think the polling looks like and whether that's likely to pass, and what impact that's going to have on the presidency of the city council, which all of us agree is probably the most powerful person in city government now. Is that going to diminish that role with respect to the ability of the mayor to have more power as the chief executive? Jonathan, you want to actually, I'll start with the professor on this one. Jonathan, professor?
Well, first, I don't know what the polling data is saying on it, obviously, so Jonathan can speak to that. But let me say that that the vast majority of cities in the United States that start to get well over 100,000 people, let's say even a little bit strong, a couple 100,000, 300,000, have all found that they need to shift to a strong mayor system. You just can't really govern a city, with, I'm going to be blunt, you can't govern a city with 13 separate heads. And that's sort of been the problem here. That I think it clearly does change the calculus here. It diminishes the power of city council. It's supposed to strengthen the power of the mayor. It might mean then that who's the president of city council is not quite as important, but I still think it's important because we're still going to need somebody who can kind of get all the wagons in the right direction and really sort of, move legislation and policy. And we still need somebody who's going to be able to talk to the next mayor. So even though I think the whole goal is to diminish the council's power, it's still not going to decrease, in my opinion, that importance of the president. Although some incumbents getting reelected might say, not as much power there, not quite as attractive as it used to be.
And then in 30 seconds, Doug, on what the numbers are saying today, razor thin. I mean, this is going to be a squeaker. What we've seen in the last couple of weeks is the definite yes, definite no on this amendment have codified at about 30% each, which means there's 40% up for grabs. That's kind of that undecided. How are people going to get refined? And what we've seen in ballot measure questions, so as we talk to our national polling firm, and unfortunately for those of us who would like to see this, is if you get to the ballot box and you're not educated on something, the tendency is to defer to no change, kind of status quo, versus moving the ballot measure forward. So a lot of opportunity in the next 10 days to educate great citizen group out doing that work. No real organized opposition to that ballot measure, but that's absolutely one to watch.
That applies, by the way, to everything, not just ballot measures, but in general. Undecided voters, when they show up to the ballot, and not well educated, all things being equal, vote against incumbents, vote against changes at the same time.
I would just add two things quickly to this conversation, Doug. One on question number one, if it does pass, it's really important, the council will settle into a new role. And it's, in my view, as important as ever, maybe more important than ever, that the council president helps guide that in a constructive way. And so if one passes, structurally, the council has a different set of responsibilities, but kind of moving into that new set of responsibility will require really good leadership. And then secondly, on all of these charter questions, just a fact for all of us to remember, for a charter question to be enacted, it requires 51% of the votes cast on that charter question. So the universe is anyone who voted on the charter question. If you don't vote on it, your vote doesn't, the no vote doesn't affect the outcome. And of that universe, 51% yes vote to enact any of these charter questions.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Steve. I was just about to mention that because that's different from constitutional amendments at the state of Minnesota, what takes 50% plus one of those voting in the election. So anybody who doesn't vote on the ballot amendment or the charter amendment or the constitutional amendment, but votes in the election is counted as a no. So this one is a straight up or down, like it or not. If you don't vote, you don't care, it turns out.
On that question, your vote,
Yeah, on
you're
that question.
weighing in on it, right?
Kevin, how much time do we have left?
Well, gentlemen, we're actually up against the clock right now. You know, this has been, we should have part 2 in about 3 weeks or so, and then we can come up from the bunker and see what were the final results, and then maybe figure out where this council, mayor office, and the charter amendment will be going from that point forward. So this has been extraordinary. I hope all of our attendees that have been listening and can learn a little bit more now about the races. All I can say is, for those that live in the city of Minneapolis, please get out and vote. And for those of us that have businesses that might not reside in Minneapolis, still have a keen interest in what this is all about and what the potential ramifications are going to be after this. So I'd like to just thank Jonathan Weinhagen, Chamber, and Steve Kramer, who are, we lock arms in a lot of things on representing you, the business. And it was great to have Professor Dave the Hammer Schultz, I think, played for the Philadelphia Flyers. And I remember going to some North Star games and watching him do his work.
Yeah.
But then also, and Doug Carnival, thank you for moderating, because you almost don't need a moderator for this type, because we have such expertise and insight as
Thanks, Kevin.
here. But you did chime in as well. So on behalf of BOMA Greater Minneapolis, thank you all for participating. And again, get out to the polls, and we'll have a lot of follow-up information post election in that regard. So Steve can go back to the Steve Kramer Memorial gathering at the ballroom. Show around and see how many people there are.
Move his arm, right?
Yeah, right there. That's the Steve Kramer Appreciation Day. At the, no,
My arm is numb, so I have to sign off now.
all right. Thanks again, everyone. Appreciate it. Take care.
See y'all soon.
Bye. Thank you.